All we understood was that I was an event planner, I needed this, and we were going to build for me. And the worst part was everyone said they wanted this tech too. I asked everyone. And when we launched it, nobody really used it. Really, it was that lack of truly understanding our user that made it challenging for us to sell this thing. I feel like an enterprise seller would get a PhD by working in this space where creativity and complexity and humans all come together. And you're selling to businesses.
You're listening to the EnterpriseReady podcast, a show aiming to change the enterprise software narrative from how to sell to enterprises to how to build for enterprises. We'll interview industry experts and enterprise software founders as we break through the jargon, establish a common vernacular, and share the lessons learned from building the world's best enterprise software. Hi, I'm Grant Miller, creator of EnterpriseReady and founder and CEO of Replicated, where we enable cloud-native software vendors like HashiCorp, CircleCI, Sneak, and many others to operationalize and scale the distribution of their modern on-prem applications. Check us out at replicated.com. The EnterpriseReady podcast is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, or just learn more about enterprise features, find us at enterpriseready.io. In this episode of the EnterpriseReady podcast, I'm joined by Ben Hindman, founder and CEO of Splash, an events marketing platform used by many of the largest enterprises. We dive into Ben's path to enterprise software, including some of his initial misfires and eventual realization that yes, he was actually selling enterprise software. We discuss the freemium business model that launched Splash, how an early big deal propelled them into the enterprise, the features they built in order to support that deal, including advanced role-based access control and single sign-on. Finally, we end on some of the core metrics that Ben tracks as indicators of business performance. This interview was a lot of fun for both Ben and I, so I really hope that you enjoy it as much as we did. All right, Ben, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So I'd love to just have you share a little bit of your background, especially around how you got into enterprise software eventually.
Sure. So I am not an enterprise software guy. My background is in events. I've been throwing events my whole life. I love events. I think that they're the most powerful way for people to connect and for business to get done. I've been throwing events since I threw my prom. Then I was the rush chair for my fraternity. So I know about events from that angle. I was one of the co-founders of a conference called the Summit Series, which is a big conference for top entrepreneurs. And then I ran events for Thrillist, which is an online magazine for dudes. I was running events for them for about 2 years. And about 2 years into that, I realized that I needed software for myself. And so I started building it with a buddy of mine who was very talented, PHP JavaScript engineer. We got to coding and we built a pretty interesting piece of technology called One Clipboard. That was our first piece of tech.
And the rest is history, is that right?
I mean, I wish it were that easy. One Clipboard failed pretty miserably. Clipboard was a events management technology that we built for about 2 years.
So you're building everything that you ever wanted, and then you realized you were wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I was the only person we were building for. And the worst part was everyone said they wanted this tech too. I asked everyone. And when we launched it, nobody really used it.
What did that piece of software do?
So that piece of software was a task list, contact list, budgeting tool, and drop site that mad-libbed event contracts.
What does drop site mean? I don't know what that is.
Meaning I had to drop a piece of paper on it. Usually as an event planner, you'll have like a site map or some sort of contract or invoice that you need to keep track of. And you want to associate it with the budget. The budget in the events world is really like the center point of the project management. And so what we did was we created this incredible budgeting tool that had all of these great additions to it that were perfectly esoterically designed for an event process. And as I said, it mad-libbed event contracts, which is like a dream to any event planner. Anyone who's listening to this that has planned an event and doesn't know how to create contracts is like salivating.
Sure.
And so we built that. It took us about 1.5 years, and we raised venture capital from one person, about $400,000.
Oh, wow, one person.
In two sets. He was an angel investor. He really believed in us. And I hired 2 incredible engineers. They were like the best engineers. So it was 3 engineers and me. and we were building one clipboard.
And you were building this, not as enterprise software. You were building this as like a piece of software that anybody that was planning an event, like a fraternity chair, might use. Anybody else?
That's exactly. Well, we were building it for people who are professional planners because that's who I was.
Sure.
I certainly, as we can probably get into later, I had no idea what truly enterprise meant.
Sure.
But I understood, at the time, high-rise and Basecamp and 37 Signals were really hip. And so we really looked up to those guys. Because we were kind of building with that model in mind.
Okay, yeah, sure.
We weren't going to fundraise. We felt so good about that. And then, of course, we put in that money. We're like, oh, cash, good. We'll keep on doing that. But truly, it was about to die. It was almost over. Nobody was using it.
And so this was, you built something that was targeted at event planners. Was this like, is that a role that is inside of most big companies? If you have more than 500 employees, you have professional event planners, or is that more like a thing you work with an outside agency to do?
So the person that we were building for one clipboard was anybody who threw an event.
Okay.
Which is a real issue. As we dove deeper into this world, so events are a $560 billion industry with every type of person who uses the word events in their title that you could imagine, from an agency to an in-house to someone in procurement. It really is one of the clumsiest words to describe an industry, events. And so to answer your question, at the time, we really did not understand that distinction. All we understood was that I was an event planner, I needed this, and we were going to build for me. Mm-hmm. And so we tried to find people who kind of looked like me, everyone from the head of events at Goldman Sachs to a small agency person. And really, it was that lack of truly understanding our user that made it challenging for us to sell this thing.
Okay, so you build this first product. It's not getting much traction. Like, how did you end up with Splash?
I want to be clear, zero traction.
Zero traction.
And we kept on building. my ego was strong in this experience because it was a beautiful piece of software that I loved. But
so you're like, okay, we just need to push harder. We can't give up. We got to keep grinding. We'll get people to adopt this thing eventually. It's just about, it's persistence and perseverance and determination.
That's right. And anyone who's created knows this plight where it just feels so good to create something that is beautiful and you feel proud of. And everyone said it. That's another important point. Every one of our users said they really wanted to use this thing. And it wasn't like they were lying. They did. But what we learned eventually was that they had a process and that we were kind of retrofitting a new process. And to get them to do something that they didn't need to do, it was very similar to vitamins versus painkillers.
Sure.
We were definitely building vitamins.
And I'm guessing that they were just using like an Excel spreadsheet or something.
That's right. So we were competing against Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. Like the ultimate tool for any esoteric job, Excel spreadsheets.
Right.
Okay, so how did Splash come about?
So we had a rule that we still have. We called it the Belsky Doctrine. Scott Belsky is the chief product officer at Adobe now. At the time, he was running a business called Behance. Mm-hmm. He was one of our advisors. He said, Ben, no matter what you do, only build one product. This is a little ironic because Scott has probably built 15 products in one, but anyway, he did tell me to do this.
Do as I say,
right.
Not as I do.
And I brought that back to my team of amazing engineers. I said, we can only build one thing, and we need to promote one clipboard at South by Southwest. So we should build a product. But per this advice from Scott, if we build a product to promote this, we need to build it so that anyone can use it, so that it is self-serve, and anyone in the world can also promote their stuff. True story. And that's how we built Splash. We said we were going to promote one clipboard at South by Southwest, and we launched Splash.
So wait, I'm so confused. So the advice was only build one product. So your takeaway from that was, if we build something, it has to be part of the product?
That's correct. Isn't that amazing?
I don't think that's what the lesson was supposed to be.
Fair enough. Oh, man.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so you built Splash. And what was the problem you saw? Like, this didn't exist?
So what Splash was doing was it was helping people really make their event look online as cool as they wanted it to. Cool was hard. In the Web 2.0 era, you had, Squarespace was just kind of happening. right? And so design on the internet was just sort of becoming a thing. And so, you had Eventbrite, and you had Meetup, and you had Evite, which was ad supported and no enterprise could use it. And then you had Paperless Post, who had actually gone pretty far down that road, but weren't thinking about it from what a business needed. And so because...
In terms, it didn't have, integrations with CRM?
None of the integration stuff, but also just none of the true customization. I mean, in this zone, we were really focused on design, making it look cool. And none of these things were available. Again, even in Paperless Post, it wasn't cool. It was maybe beautiful, but cool was a different feeling. We needed it to feel customizable, Squarespacey at the time. We were looking at those guys.
Sure. Paperless Post always felt, to me, somewhat high-end, right? This is, because it wasn't actually cheap to send, so it feels like there's a little bit of, effort put in. It's great for, a fancy invitation to a cocktail party or something, right?
Totally. Try to remember, think back towards 2012. We were fitting a specific need for kind of this new generation of designers. Sure, it maybe wasn't fancy, but it was very clear that you had spent a lot of money on something. And kind of like any good technology, ours looked like you'd spent a lot of money on something.
Sure.
And the fact that we removed our brand, that it was white label.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the biggest, most important things that, businesses really responded to at the time.
Okay, so these alternatives out there just didn't allow you to have the design, and you thought that we should build this tool because we want something different than sending a paperless post to promote our software. We want something different than Eventbrite because that's not very customizable and not very great. So you built a tool that allowed you to build, what was the product feature set?
So the product feature set was, at the time, just a very simple form to collect RSVPs.
Okay.
And I want to just double back on this because I think this is an important point for anyone building enterprise technology. We had a very clear thought, which was that brand is binary. That is either Splash's brand or it is your brand. And in the enterprise world, it was important that it was your brand. We did things like we put our logo at the bottom and not at the top. Or we made it very easy to design it to look like you, or the emails came from you, or the vanity URL was yours. And I know that seems simple, but when we were selling it to Spotify, who was our first customer, that was what they said they wanted. That just the fact that they could own it changed their perception of what our technology was.
Okay, but you were the actual first customer because you used it to promote the One Notebook, or what is that?
One Clipboard, Grant.
One Clipboard, sorry.
I knew that name wasn't good.
One Clipboard. Use and promote One Clipboard at South by Southwest.
Correct.
And then how did the conversation with Spotify kick off after that?
Great. So we put it out there and we threw a party. And again, it was a very straightforward RSVP form that just captured names and looked cool. One of those RSVPs was somebody who worked at Spotify.
Oh, nice.
And that was our viral coefficient in the beginning. At the beginning, 1 out of every 25 people who signed up for an event turned into a host.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It really is. That freemium product and the RSVP viral coefficient that's inside of that still today drives, goodness, about a third of our leads.
Wow, that's amazing.
We just crossed over 2,500 on Alexa. So we have a huge footprint on the internet.
Okay, so then this person from Spotify ran their events. You knew him from a past life or something. Is that right?
No. That was the crazy part. This whole time I'd been selling One Clipboard door to door.
Yeah.
Truly, as an enterprise sales rep for a 2-person company. And all of a sudden, Spotify was calling me saying, hey, we need this up and running now. And then the next one was Gansevoort Hotel, which I promised at the time was very cool.
Yeah.
And then it was Google. Google was the next customer that RSVP'd and said, I need a site.
No, wait, really? So you had 3 cool brands too.
Immediately.
Yeah. Okay, so they used your tool. It said powered by
Splash. Do you want to make a splash?
So you named it. Your product was called One Clipboard, but you had a second product
that was also inside of that product. And I swear, One Clipboard became the planning tab inside of Splash. You had your Splash and your One Clipboard. Grant, I promise you at the time it seemed like it made sense.
Okay.
In retrospect, it is very ridiculous how long I held on to that code. What I will say is, and we're going to fast forward now 6 or so years to where we are today.
Sure.
Those planning tools, I am writing a narrative for my team right now about a business that we are integrating with to really incorporate those planning tools.
Cool.
So I know, and I would say to anyone who has that intuition early in their business, I knew that it was important.
Yeah.
And it still is. But that didn't mean it was the first and most important.
Sure.
The issue was that it didn't have any viral coefficient to it. It was a, door-to-door sales product. And this new one, it became so clear that it caught fire.
I mean, in reality, you were trying to sell a piece of freemium SMB software with an enterprise sales process, which just doesn't work. It's like, and it didn't have all the enterprise features that it really would need in order to go out and demand a higher price.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We learned a lot in those early days, and probably also not enough.
Okay, so you get these customers, and then things just start rolling, and you basically are selling Splash That as the main product. That's what everybody wants.
That's right. Well, and we weren't even selling it. They were coming to us. It was so many businesses.
Were they paying you?
So in the beginning, it was just we were selling vanity URLs, email credits, and white label your page.
Okay. And how much was that?
So that was about $100 total, one-time fee to get you that bundle.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. But that's per event, so maybe you have lots of events.
Yeah. We were seeing some revenue, and we were able to process money, which at the time was a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
At that point, we said, we want more money. We can layer in tickets and ticket fees. So we started building that. And so we started to process the dollars. Dollars started coming in.
Sure.
And that's a good thing, but it's also a really, really bad thing. Because once you have $1, then you start to say, well, now I need lots more dollars. And investors start asking questions about those dollars and start looking at the unit economics of the business. And so, once we realized that we should be charging more, we said, well, what's more than $100? $2,500. And in our mind, we were like, come on, no one's paying that. Per year, excuse me. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I should have mentioned, we flipped the entire model in order to do that. We said, we want to create a subscription product. Again, we were really focused on high-rise and Basecamp, so an SMB subscription product. And so we launched something that we called the Producer Package.
Oh, wow.
I know. I thought it was a pretty good name. And people started signing up for that like hotcakes. And we started selling.
And what that was you could create as many events as you wanted to throughout the year.
Correct. And you'd have all the white label emails, vanity URLs. And, we had one or two people at that time who were doing customer service. And they were manning the phones. And so you had access to them if you signed up for this. And so I guess anybody who's listening and thinking about pricing right now, I wish you, Grant, had come up to me and just shaken me at that moment and said, if you don't sell something for more than $20,000 a year, you should just stop immediately. Unless, of course, you have a really good demand gen engine. But man, oh man, we were selling it. We were selling for $2,500 a year. And it really needed much more money to make it economically viable. You seem like you're pausing, and I want to hear why you don't agree with that.
So my pause there is I actually think that when you're entering the market and no one has any reason to use your gear, right? You sort of need penetration pricing, right? And so that's a concept in pricing economics is you need a price that you can come in at that's cheap enough that people are just going to buy it and they don't have to expect as much from it, right? So if you provide 10x the value on $2,500, they feel really good and they tell their friends about it. If you charge them $20K and they get $25,000 of value, that's only a small incremental bump on the actual value, their ROI. And so they feel less good about it, right? And so I think early on, this is kind of what funding is for, right? You want to be able to get into a lot of these customers, get the success stories. Realistically, those early customers that you got, Spotify, Google, Gansevoort Hotel, they might have paid you $100, but if you got to use their logo or tell their story, the value that you actually got, they paid you with money, but also with that story. That story was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to you, right? Because you got to then say, well, look, here's how these great companies are actually, sending out this stuff for their events.
I think that's a really good point, but I want to provide a small counter to it.
Yeah, great.
Pricing can often be a signal.
Yep.
And while I hear you that, coming in with a lower price and truly attacking a specific segment makes a ton of sense and helps you kind of really penetrate that market. if you release pricing that looks SMB, you actually attract a lot of SMB. And while I hear you that it's probably, $2,500 a year is incredibly small to a Spotify, $2,500 a year is huge to an SMB, and they expect as much as Spotify.
Sure.
And so what you end up doing is you end up treating those SMB customers like enterprise.
Yeah.
Because they demand it. And so while I hear you that you should decrease your price in the early days, I would think about that $15,000 amount, or call it $1,000 a month, is kind of the threshold before you get into a zone where you're playing in the enterprise. And really past that, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of start low. But if you go too low, oh man, the people you attract.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. I mean, so I guess my perspective there is you did and you continued to have raised prices over time, right? Because you get more in, you figure more out, like who you want your users to be is actually quite important. Your pricing can kind of signal that, but so do your features, and so does how your team talks about everything. And so, at that point, you might not have been ready really for the deals that you're doing today, right? You didn't have the organizational maturity in order to make that happen. So
right. And I mean, that's a nice segue to what happened next in the story, is that Anheuser-Busch came knocking.
Okay.
And they wanted a $500,000 contract. And again, we're selling $100 a month contracts, or $200 a month contracts, and now a $500K contract.
What did they want for $500K?
They had a brand ambassador program with all of these people who went out into the world and collected information while they sampled beer. And what's really complex about the spirits as well as the beer industry is that they have a 3-tier system, which means that the wholesalers who don't actually work and aren't legally allowed to work for the brands, they are actually doing a lot of the on-site marketing in the accounts, which are the bars or the off-premise places. And so right there, you have this incredible instance of a forced role-based access control issue, where you need permissioning in between two organizations, many organizations at many different levels. And here comes Anheuser-Busch to splash and says, we need this built fast.
Yeah.
And so they forced us to create a very robust permissioning tool.
That's awesome.
It was, and incredibly challenging. We just didn't know really what we were doing. But we went after it. And we didn't even understand, we had never heard the term role-based access control. I actually hadn't really heard that term until I went onto the EnterpriseReady.com website. And we were like, oh yeah, we built that, but man, we didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And so we built that and we rolled it out. We had, at one point, AB was throwing 100,000 events per year on Splash.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
across
crazy.
Around, I don't know, there was probably about 20,000 people in the system at any point.
And so what were they doing before you? Do you know?
Homegrown.
Really? Okay, so they built their own.
Still is.
Okay.
I mean, the space that I operate in, I feel like an enterprise seller would get a PhD by working in this space because it truly is. Events are the most complex, almost definitionally, the most human complex activity you can think of. The amount of notifications, approvals, creativity, workflow, the amount of time that goes into it. I mean, we're talking about so much scale as well as these micro important moments that you have to support in the real world. When an email doesn't go out from Marketo, oops, we press send again.
Yeah.
When an event doesn't go off, somebody gets fired.
Yeah.
Right? So this has to be like NASA tested, right? And so, I mean, it's been an amazing experience to be building in this space where creativity and complexity and humans all come together. And you're selling to businesses.
Okay, and so that Anheuser-Busch deal came in and you were like, how many people were you at that point?
So we had about 8 people in the business.
Wow.
Yep. And so we were still supporting this freemium product. We were supporting a handful, I want to say 12 other enterprise businesses. Nearly half of them were on the freemium product and half of them were in our enterprise system. We had certain groups that were kind of starting to join. And then Anheuser-Busch, we started building. We started building true enterprise tech. And that was our first step into the enterprise tech world.
And so this is a complex permissioning system because of these 3 tiers. And there's also some regulation and legal rules. So
much.
You're kind of diving into those to understand and make sure that this is compliant with what they need.
Yep.
And did you build that in a way that another company not in their industry but wanted the same kind of concepts could then use the same features?
That's exactly right. Per our Belsky doctrine, build one product, we always made sure it was self-serve and easy to use for another business. Hennessy was the next one that joined up, and they had a very similar use case.
Yeah, so you saw an opportunity within the adult beverage industry.
Exactly. Truly, sampling.
Yeah. So you were like, okay, look, Anheuser-Busch needs this. So does every other large adult beverage company in the world.
That's right.
Great.
And so we kept on building for that. I will say, to our credit, we understood that events are events at their core. And what we understood in the beginning of our process was that if we worked very closely with our customers, built products that they could use while also doing product discovery, we could actually build a product that could be used across many different use cases and be flexible across the enterprise. I will say it's a challenging move to make. And as we've scaled as a business, it's really no longer something we do. It really only works in the very early stages of a business to launch features and products alongside new clients. Launching them alongside existing clients is something that we do because we already have those existing relationships.
Sure.
But it's a tightrope.
That's actually a really interesting piece for product discoveries. I think early on, you basically don't have a choice other than to work with new customers and build features that they think or that they need to see in your product, right? It's something that people often will caution against, right? Don't build specifically features that some organization needs, that's willing to pay you $500K. It might be a one-off use case. And so they kind of suggest that you try to collect those feedback and then synthesize it. And you're right, because if you don't have a great working relationship with them, maybe you don't have a large contract, you don't know if they're actually going to use it if you build the things that they ask you to build. So you take these risks early on. In your case, it really paid off, right? Building this tooling. And it turns out, part of the reason we wrote EnterpriseReady is because we wanted software founders and product folks to understand the features that when you hear these requests, you should probably lean into, right? Because it's not going to be the last time you hear it. So advanced permissioning, amazing functionality, right? If it had been some one-off thing that they wanted to do or change things some other way, maybe not the best way to do it. But this is one of those features that you can just go so deep into, and bigger companies have so many requirements. So you got that feedback from them, you built it in, they started paying you. Were you doing professional services for them at all? For them to be able to actually leverage that permissioning tooling?
So many professional services.
Okay.
I really want to underline this. In 2015 was when we started to understand what enterprise technology really was. We come from New York. New York is high design, lots of great agencies. At the time, there were some startups coming up, but they were mostly B2C. Warby was a big thing then, right?
Sure.
That genre. We didn't have an old school of enterprise technology to explain this to us. And so when we heard services, we just thought, oh yeah, that's what it takes to get them up, right? And make them happy. Yeah, and we weren't charging for it, nothing like that.
You weren't charging for it.
No, we had no idea. I mean, truly, I'd say one of the most important things I have done as a founder is to acknowledge the dearth of enterprise talent in New York and go search for it outside of New York or find people who really do know what they're talking about in New York City from an enterprise tech standpoint.
No, I understand that pretty well, being based in LA. And it's really around sort of that leadership level, folks that have done this before. Almost all that talent's in the Bay Area, right?
Or Seattle.
Oh yeah, sure. Seattle, that's a great point.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of folks there that have done that. It's hard to find it in other cities. And you can get great developers anywhere. You can get great designers anywhere. But getting people that really understand sort of how to scale certain components of an enterprise software business, it's hard.
And what did difference 5 years makes? I mean, if you look at New York now,
Sure.
I am seeing tremendous talent. I mean, Mongo, right, IPO'd recently, they're throwing off a lot of incredible talent.
Yeah.
And that's just one. And so we are seeing that in New York. I do think it's changing, but at the time, it wasn't the case. And so charging for professional services, I came back and said, we're not an agency, guys. We're not charging for that, right?
Yeah.
We're software.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's one of those interesting pieces where I think Maybe the tide is changing a bit. I think people are more comfortable with the idea of like having some services revenue because you're basically doing services work no matter what, right?
You better.
Yeah.
I mean, and in a way, it was a great thing that we didn't understand that we were supposed to charge for that because we built a culture of customer success that really served the client independent of dollars attached. And, that I really think one of our key differentiators, especially in the early days when the product wasn't right, was building a thoughtful support and customer success team, really investing in that and taking a lot of pride in that team.
One other thing I think is really interesting, kind of just changing a bit, is when you get into this large deal with Anheuser-Busch or any of the other big deals you've done over time, I'll say this, don't mean to insult you at all, but I sort of doubt that the early Splash team had a lot of like enterprise security background either. And so I'm guessing that you saw some like vendor security assessment questionnaires and we're kind of like, what the...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm smiling here. Yeah. And everything. And everything you're talking about. Training, implementations, configurations, integrations, certainly privacy, certainly security. It was a learning curve as steep as any I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And also, we were pushing really complex, we built essentially a CRM on top of a permissioning tool with shared contacts and then matched that with an integrated CMS that needed templatization. And we were trying to run and build a business. And this is just for one customer. Yeah, we ran right into a wall.
Yeah.
And it was very scary.
I mean, the interesting thing is that there was enough demand. Like the person who was requesting this product from you at AB had enough sway to say, look, like, I know that this might not be the most like robust and secure tool in the world, but like, it turns out the thing we're doing internally is not either. We need this so bad. And this is such a big pain point for us that they were able to push it through. And maybe their security teams worked with you along the way and compliance teams worked with you along the way to make sure that
that's exactly
the thing
right.
You were delivering.
Yeah, and you've heard it, I'm sure, a million times. It is all about making sure that champion has a voice, making them look as good as you can, and delivering and setting expectations and delivering. It's a lot of that. And it took us to truly implement them, was about 6 months.
Oh, that's not bad at all, actually.
I mean, yeah, in retrospect, you're right. You know?
For you, it felt like an eternity, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, every day was the scariest day of our lives.
Yeah.
And, it still is. It's a great system. It's a great plan. What I will say is that, and I hope I say this without feeling sad about it, at some point they decided to change the way they were doing stuff. They were bought by some Brazilians.
Oh, yeah.
They started changing the way they did things. They ended up rebuilding it from scratch on top of Salesforce at some point. And while that was certainly sad at the time, that was, 3 years later. And, the organization had changed tremendously. The Anheuser-Busch organization had. And we ended up using that technology for so many different clients.
Sure.
And finally, what I will say is 4 years now, afterwards, we're rebuilding our BAC. So that ended up lasting us about 4 years, which is a pretty good lifespan for a piece of enterprise tech.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, interesting with the Salesforce mention, do you guys integrate with Salesforce today?
We do. Oh, yeah.
Have deep integration?
It's a bit nuanced, but essentially the difference between what they were doing and what they needed of us, they were doing a lot less on-site marketing, and a lot of our value prop was the sizzle on-site, less the capture. We did both, but they essentially they said, we don't really need as much sizzle on-site. And so they went into a Salesforce instance. I'd put out there, and anyone at AB, call me if this is actually launched. Who knows if they've launched it yet.
Sure.
So, someone had a good idea to build it homegrown. I have no idea if it's actually out.
Build versus buy.
Always the fun one.
Yeah. Okay, so then one thing you mentioned earlier, which I thought was really interesting, was this combination as a founder of, as you're building this first version of your software and you're really involved in product, it's like kind of trying to balance that execution with also fundraising in the external world and trying to get people to see the bigger vision.
Yeah.
You mentioned some challenges around this.
Yeah. I think the most important thing I've learned as a founder and a CEO, and certainly going from founder to CEO has been an interesting evolution for me, is that time and kind of your perception of time changes as the product evolves and as the company gets bigger. In the early days, you're really dealing with couple months at a time, if not a month at a time, time spans. And when you make a decision, you're probably seeing that through, and you need to see at least a couple months ahead. When you're handling 500 companies, which is about the stage that we're at right now, you need to see about 3 years ahead. You need to. And so that goes from a month to 3 years. That's a huge delta. And, what happened to me really kind of early in our evolution was that I was fundraising. And I was also deeply involved in product. And when you're fundraising 3 years out, and that's what the story you have to tell, you must be that visionary in order to raise the capital. If you're not checking yourself and actually executing today, which is what product needs, again, product is probably now to a couple months out, you can really screw some stuff up because product requires that level of deep focus. And so, if there are any product-oriented CEOs out there, I would urge you to really think about where you're existing and where the team needs you to exist versus where the investors need you to exist. That's been a really challenging education period for me.
I've felt that pain. I know my co-founders felt that pain. And it's interesting you kind of pointed out, I think you said just acknowledging it is like a really kind of important first step.
Totally.
Right.
Because often you're having conversations with your team about the 3-year vision, and they're telling you about a bug they're fixing, for tomorrow.
Right.
And so, by acknowledging it, it's one step to letting them know that you're not talking about that. Look, what I will say is, and this is deep credit to my team, they have come along for the vision ride with me.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they are just like, man, I can't focus on the vision. I need to focus on today. And that's their job, and they're awesome for it.
Yeah.
And so in a way, as a founder, you need to kind of acknowledge and check yourself.
Yeah, especially when you're in the product really deep. I mean, switching hats and putting it, going from hey, let me tell you about why this is going to be a, $200 million a year business in 3 or 4 years to let me fix this one customer workflow and make this integrate better with some tool and make sure that end-to-end flow feels great. If you're the product leader and the CEO, trying to do both of those at the same time.
Oh, man. And, Grant, I know you've experienced this too. So, I'd love your thoughts on it. But even having product conversations, I find to be relatively dangerous if you're operating too far in advance. Because they see you as the CEO, your voice, especially when the business changes from 12 to 20 people,
Sure.
At some point, you're the boss of 20 people, and that's how you're viewed. And so you're no longer just a voice. You're not even allowed to be just a voice in a product conversation, and you're kicking around ideas on a whiteboard. All of a sudden, you are the boss of 20 people, and that's a much louder megaphone.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I do to help curtail that. And number one, most of my product conversations are just with my CTO and co-founder, Mark, who's actually sort of the product leader. So I'll talk to him and we'll go through things, and that's kind of longer term vision and other ideas. And then I let him sort of figure out how to make sure that we're executing that appropriately. And now he has even one other layer, which is our director of engineering, who spends time with the engineering team to make sure we're building the right things. The other thing that I try to do whenever I'm talking to people, especially around front-end stuff, is just say I'm not the CEO saying this. This is a personal preference thing, potentially. You have the agency here to decide if what's right. To me, this feels off, but I'm totally fine with you. If you're no, Grant, you're wrong. This is the right answer. You should say that. I think acknowledging is good. It probably still influences.
I was going to say, good luck.
Yeah.
The first one I think is the only answer, which is to level. Add levels and layers in between you and the team and make sure that you're being clear with them that you're one input. But certainly, I can't tell you how many times I've come up to somebody and just even given some a congratulations or said something negative about what they're working on, and have gotten it in an HR conversation or gotten it from their manager saying, "Hey, did you mention this?" And it's it's a different place that you're coming from. And so I think the only answer at this point is to hire really great people and filter those conversations through them. It doesn't mean don't have great relationships with your people. I love my people. I love working with them. I love seeing their work. I hope they'll show me more of their work, and I promise I won't.
React too strongly.
It's been a learning curve, but
So one of those things you just mentioned that I think is interesting is you said hire great people, right? And so I think you mentioned you have a framework you use around creating clarity in roles in hiring, and really trying to find the right people? Like, what's your framework for that?
Okay, so at some point in around 2016, I read the book Who. Have you read this book?
I have not.
Oh, you got it. Everyone has to read the book. It's the best book.
All right.
In so many words, the thing that I noticed after reading that book that everybody in my organization did was they would have a meeting with this person and they would say a couple things about the business and then ask the exact same questions in every single interview. And then after the interview, they would write a note saying, I really liked him. And honestly, especially if we're talking about implicit bias, what they probably were saying was, this person went to a pretty good school, spoke with a smile, and seemed like they had good experience. That's kind of what they meant.
Sure.
And they weren't spending the time understanding, did this person actually meet the criteria that this specific role required? What we started doing after reading this book, and then iterating on this process, is coming up with, they call it a scorecard, and it essentially means very specific objectives that this person is meant to hit, key results that this person is meant to hit, qualities that this person is meant to have, and experience that this person is meant to have. And specificity is the most important thing here. Specificity is a big deal. If you can't be specific about the role, I would challenge anyone who's hiring. If they can't be so specific, then they don't actually know what they're hiring for. That doesn't mean do the person's job for them, but be incredibly clear in the hiring process. That's number one. But also specificity from the candidate. If they can't speak very specifically about their experience or their ideas or their perspective, and they can't go 3 or 4 levels into that, guess what? They haven't done that job. Or they don't really know how to do that job, or they're really stretching. So at least know that. And then what we do is we make sure to equip every single new interview with a question that we've all agreed upon, and we've agreed upon what we're looking for before they walk into that room. And what we find is it's really not so hard. You need 3 or 4 questions, 3 or 4 great questions, and you spend 3 levels on each of those questions. And if people can come back and they can say, hey, this person spoke specifically, had great ideas, communicated well about them, and kind of, I realized, also met these qualities, what they might also say is, I couldn't figure this out. And I will say that that's one of the most important things you can get your team to start saying. Hey, I couldn't figure this out in the meeting. Can you try to figure that out? Can you figure out if this person actually has great copywriting skills? Can you figure out if this person has actually led as big of a team as they say, or if, they actually were kind of a cog in the wheel? Can you figure this out is a really useful thing to understand.
So sort of narrow down the hey, these things all seem like check boxes, but this one I'm not 100% on. Jury's still out on it.
Correct. Really treat your team as if they're coloring in a coloring book together. And the end result is a beautiful picture of that candidate. And if you guys can actually align there, you can find great people. And I will say we have knocked people out of the process incredibly late in the process. And of course, you want to get it as early as possible, but better to not hire that person, right, than to hire the wrong person. And actually, what I'll also say is better to also not hire the wrong role. Sometimes in a process, you realize that this person is great, but you still don't have total team alignment on that role. And so that's why the scorecard and being very specific and object-oriented around that scorecard, objective-oriented.
So it's interesting. So the idea of creating the scorecard, you think, is actually a really important part of the overall process, because it defines the role, defines everything else you're looking for, gets alignment for the team around what this person's going to do.
Absolutely. And if you need an economic model to explain it, you can do the math yourself. But if this person, let's just say, costs $100,000, and they're going to be working for you for about 2 years if they're mediocre, right? And so if they're bad, sure, you'll get rid of them. But rarely do you know how good or bad someone is, right? But you do know that in about 2 years, you're going to have to get rid of somebody who's mediocre. And if they're great, they're about 3 years to 4 years, if you can keep them. Oh man, that's $200,000, and then the effects on the business there. It's worth spending time to write, 1 page about what this is, and to get that team's alignment around the role. I find that slowing down that hiring process in order to get that right has fundamentally changed what our team looks like, and that's been one of the biggest, most important things we have done, especially in a market like New York, where not everybody knows the tune to enterprise technology.
Yeah.
And so you have to work through that song together.
Yeah, it's also kind of hitting on your point from earlier. It's amazing how an ecosystem can evolve with just a handful of companies that have scaled in the area, right? So Mongo and Security Scorecard and whoever else, right? These actual deep enterprise software companies. kick off these people that have done these roles, right? Because all you have to do is go do it for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And now you're like very well equipped to go lead it at the next place, right?
That's exactly
So
right.
it spins up all these people.
I do think we're looking at a very new New York. I'm speaking as if New York is in 2013. 2019 New York. Oh man, we have some great enterprise talent, and we have a lot of people that have come from the Bay Area and from Seattle and have worked with us. We've also built companies that serve many of those companies, so we've gotten a chance to see their playbooks as well.
Sure.
And what I will say, and I'm speaking to all my counterparts out on the Bay side, when you match that with the grittiness and the creativity that New York offers, I think you have a pretty cool ecosystem. So I'd urge anyone who's not building SaaS in New York to take another look.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also people sometimes just want to get out of SF. They've been there for a while and they want to come to a great city like New York or LA or wherever else they might want to go. So,
and I'll do another plug for LA. I spent a lot of time in LA. Grant's building one of the best enterprise companies in LA, but you're also seeing a lot of enterprise people head to LA. I'm really impressed with that ecosystem.
Yeah, it turns out it's an incredible place to live. So people just want to be there. It makes it easy.
You and your birds and
your
matcha.
Okay, so then what's the most important role that you've hired in the last 6 months?
Oh, man. Executive coordinator.
Oh, what? Okay.
True story. We've hired a lot of amazing executives. I hired a VP engineering, a VP product, a chief strategy officer.
Sure.
All have been very important. I will say that as a CEO at this stage, we have about 150 people. I did need somebody to really help me scale myself. And so hiring somebody who was incredibly bright and thoughtful and could really help me stay disciplined around where my focus lies has been a game changer for me personally.
Oh, interesting. And so that person came on recently and it just is focused on
leveraging me. How can we create more leverage out of Ben? How can we get Ben to focus on the most important things? I think that that's kind of a cop-out answer. I think that anybody who's listening to this is thinking about their executive team. I will say a thought that's really important in building a team is this. Just because you don't have the headcount does not necessarily mean that you don't have the role. And I think that's been an unlocker in understanding my business. Just because you have a head of CS does not mean that you shouldn't have that person be thinking about implementation, right? There is a role for implementation even if there isn't a headcount. And so kind of seeing what best-in-class enterprise technology stacks look like from a people standpoint, and acknowledging that you have one person doing 2 of those roles, at least acknowledging that is a really important first step. And then what you start to do is you start to fill in those roles with best-in-class people and actually become positions, not just roles. But I think just making sure you understand that has really changed my understanding of the business.
Yeah, it's actually a great point. There is, just like there's a similar feature set, which, the EnterpriseReady features, almost every enterprise software company has a very similar organizational structure, right? And I think acknowledging that and knowing how that organizational chart maps to your organization, right? Because you're right. It's like, okay, everybody's doing, sales and marketing and customer success and implementation and support. And like you can kind of map out the whole list, right? Product marketing, product, like you go like write every executive role down and realize that, and you kind of understand what the different, aspects of that job is. And even if you only have 8 people total, you're doing all of those roles.
That's exactly right.
Right?
And so it just totally acknowledging that and acknowledging it almost publicly and saying, hey, you're doing 2 roles and we need that of you right now. And that will change with scale. But right now we need you to operate as such. It gives you a much easier framework to operate in. And it also acknowledges the reality of how you're actually working.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you're so right. I think I'll actually write a little blog post up about that at some point. I love that
winner.
idea. So
I like
it's a good one. Yeah, because it's like there are so many pieces of what you're doing every day and understanding when you're putting on or who's putting on different hats. I mean, like, well, you actually do implementation, right?
Yep. You do education.
Yeah. You do training.
You do professional services. You do all of them.
Yeah.
But are you acknowledging that? Are you just kind of telling somebody they're doing one thing, right? And they're actually doing 5.
Yeah, that's a great point. You think about early on, product leaders end up really taking on a lot of those roles, right? So
and customer success, you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
I mean, look, under my customer success team, and I think this is hopefully helpful for anyone who's building it, he has customer success, which is different than customer support. Then he has education, implementation. We have something creative design services. That's more of our service arm on the creative end. Then he has the data team. The data team works very closely with him, so kind of reporting from a customer success standpoint. And then there's also a tight handshake with solutions consulting. So those are going to be the people who are configuring in advance. And what I need to tell everyone is that all of those roles are now departments with several people in each. And that is a new evolution as of probably 18 months ago. But certainly we've been doing all of those things.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then what's next for Splash? Like, what are you guys working on? Is it more and more enterprise? Does it go down market? How do you think about it?
It is more enterprise by focusing on our core. I think we are really lucky to have gotten to a point where we have critical mass of customers and a very clear value proposition. We've hired an incredible executive team that has just started this year. And really, starting in Q1, we have all of these executives have been ramped. Our plans are really clear. And it pains me, Grant, to say, we need to step on the brakes. As a founder, as a go-get-em founder, I want to go as fast as we can, and I want to build this incredible vision. I mean, our goal is to make it unbelievably easy for businesses to host meaningful events. And as I see into the future of events, I see these things happening in a click, right? I see the entire event coming together with the right people in the room, getting the right experience, and leaving with something beautiful in their hearts. But in order to accomplish that, I need my business to take a quick step back and to really focus on what made us good in the first place and make our customers who have been asking for features and higher quality issues to really feel loved. And so we're doing that, and we're spending about a year doing that. And we've been spending this last quarter really planning for that next stage. And I'm really proud of the team for coming and rallying around it, because it's brave to say we're going to slow down. And it's brave to say, hey, you know what? We have a couple customers who would be really happy if we really focused on that. And so that's what we're doing this year. I think net, it's going to set us up to become a much, much bigger business. I hope when someone's listening to this podcast in 2021, they're like, man, Ben he made the right move there. He really focused on the core and really scaled this thing up.
That's a really interesting way to talk about that, because I think it doesn't necessarily feel like the sexiest move, right? We're going to, focus on the core, do what we do better, right? Everyone's like, oh, here's the next thing, right?
Yeah.
The next thing, and the next thing, here's how we're going to expand. And in reality, it's like, well, you already have this existing thing, and it's not perfect. And the more you can pump into that and make that experience better and improve the core, I mean, that is where your business is. So I think that's a really probably the right move. I mean, I don't know your business that well, but I can see how many businesses would benefit from that approach more often.
Absolutely.
Right?
And again, it's very scary because you need to grow. Cash is a really beautiful thing.
Sure.
We've really, as a business, changed the marketplace. So now much of our differentiated product, they're copycats, even at larger businesses, kind of coming after us. So of course we want to differentiate more.
Yeah.
It's scary, man. I mean, you're building tech, in the 21st century. And so you want to go fast. And also you see all these great businesses like, Uber and, Facebook who are adding products left and right and buying businesses. So you want to go as fast as they are. As I said, I'm really proud of our team for taking a step back. And, they came from them and it came from our customers, and they said, let's really focus back.
And will that be adding in, you said you're going to rebuild your role-based access control.
Correct.
Or you're going to build some new
Create flow is really exciting for us.
Okay, great.
We're just going to make the create flow much easier and do more stuff, sure, but kind of built off of core tech.
Yeah.
We're going to go back into our CMS and really just kind of make it more fun, and we're changing the nav so that the nav just feels better, and that is not sexy to change a navigation system.
And anything any of the other EnterpriseReady features, like more advanced reporting or deeper integrations?
Deeper integrations for sure. But even that, we're not saying let's add more integrations. We're saying let's go make our core integrations more robust.
Yeah, I love that.
Let's sell to the clients that are using those. Let's focus on our API a bit. It's all of those things that are really things that we're already doing in a really significant and scaled way. How do we just make the NPS score for each of those products go a little bit higher? And if we can do that, look, anyone who's running an enterprise business, this, retention is the one.
Yeah.
Pick a metric, that's the one. And so we're focusing on that metric this year. And I will say, this is actually, now we're going to geek out a bit on metrics. we changed our KPI. We run our business with 5 KPIs, and we decided this year to change one of our KPIs from net negative churn, which, the net churn, to gross churn. And we said, we're going to be focusing on gross churn, not net churn.
Okay.
Meaning
so
that,
explain the difference.
Sure. Net churn is all of the money you lose plus all of the money you expand, and you're looking to get it above 100% so that you are expanding more than you're losing. So that's called net negative churn.
So recurring revenue that goes away, and then recurring revenue from existing customers that grows.
Correct.
Put those together, hopefully that's bigger than one, right?
Correct. And we have a great percentage there. We feel really good about that. But what's important, especially as you're thinking about kind of the stability and kind of robustness of your core product, is that can often, it can kind of hide some warts.
Sure.
In that, you might be losing a lot of gross revenue, and you're kind of expanding enough that you don't really notice it. We as a business, and we do this quite publicly, at least internally, we say, hey, this is why we're changing this metric, and we're going to be focusing on it. We're going to be projecting against this metric. We're going to be thinking about this all day, all night, and really we're doing that for our customers because they scream loudest through their retention metric.
Sure.
We never want it to get there. We hope that we can get them excited before that happens. It's a really important way to think about it.
Okay, so that's one. What are the other core metrics you think about?
So last year was MRR, CAC ratio. So I would say anyone who's raising Series B or C, the CAC ratio is the only one. It's an efficiency. It's dollars in, dollars out. They call it the magic number.
So talk more about that one.
Sure. So if you spend $1 on marketing spend in Q1, and you get $1 back in Q2, but it's gross margin adjusted, so let's just say you have a 70% gross margin, that will be about a 0.7 CAC ratio because it's 0.7 back of the one that you spent. Magic number is another way to see it. And people calculate it differently. I would look at, I think Matrix has the best one here.
Okay.
Scale Ventures also has a good way of explaining this. But anyway, that number, it's dollars in, dollars out, quarter to quarter. And so it's payback period is another way to think about it.
Sure.
And you really end up seeing the business in a really naked way.
Yeah.
It's the most naked of the numbers. Now, what I will say is, especially as you're growing the business, you want to invest more. And so sometimes it might dip, and you'll see these businesses go like their CAC ratio will go like 0.5 and then up to 1.2. And that's probably too high, 1.2. You're not spending enough to grow. You need to acquire new customers and expand existing customers. So you do need to spend on that. It's not to say that there is the right number, but there's probably a right number for the right stage and right time and right cycle of any business. And we find it's just a really helpful way for us to keep control of burn. I mean, again, we spoke a bit earlier about time and seeing ahead. That's probably the hardest part of our job as enterprise founders, is that we are forced to think years in advance so that we can make investments now, both on marketing and on product and on sales. So that CAC ratio is a helpful way to kind of watch that trend line. And so we report out on that. The other ones, we've just added in 2 new KPIs. Active users, monthly users. So kind of now that we're at a scale, we can kind of see across all of our user base, seeing how active they are and kind of measuring and projecting against that.
Does that include with the freemium, or is it just paid?
Just enterprise.
Okay,
we call business users. Yeah, certainly the freemium's interesting, but that's not the metric. And we do even segment that down in further analysis, but we're always thinking, okay, how do we make sure people are active in the system? How do we make sure that we're actually getting value? And the last one is a company-oriented one, which is unplanned attrition, unplanned people leaving without us planning for them to leave.
Sure.
Look, what I will say for any investor listening, we're actually doing quite well on all of them, but it's because we're focusing on them.
Yeah. I mean, it's what I love is the idea, what you said with gross churn, because you're like, look, it's very easy for us to want to look at the metrics that are the most vanity oriented, right? Whatever metrics feel the best, because like we all have some metrics where we're kicking ass.
Totally.
Right? But like, unless that's just some superpower that like is just going to drive your whole business, looking at the ones that you're just going to continuously do well on is not how you actually are going to fix the problems, right? It's just making yourself feel better. So you probably have a few vanity metrics that you'll share with people randomly to just get them excited. But the ones that you drive your business by shouldn't be the vanity ones. They should be the ones that are like actually going to make an impact. And if there's an opportunity for you to like, chase those down, you should. And
it is crazy how when you pick only a few metrics and you make them important to the business, and if you think about each of those metrics as having one stakeholder associated with it. So there are going to be some metrics that are very important to new investors, some that'll be very important to existing, some that'll be important to the executive team, some that'll be important to the customers, and some that'll be important to the total team, right? And if you can say, hey, this really matters to that key stakeholder, and you make it important, it actually just fundamentally changes your business. You just start focusing on different things, and you can actually drive the business by projecting and watching those particular metrics.
Love that. Well, Ben, I know our time's about up. You got to run here in a minute. I just want to see if you have any parting words, anywhere to end.
Oh, man. Well, thanks for this. I will say anyone who's listening already knows about your site. So we have used your site and been really thoughtful about how we've built our business because of EnterpriseReady. And so I want to thank you.
Hey, of course, man. That's
Please
why I
keep
put it
on
out
building
there.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would say to any founder out there is the ride is long, but it is so valuable to build workflow and data-oriented tools that can change people's professions and change their lives. And so I want to urge everyone to keep on building out there and build awesome stuff. And good luck. And if you want a shoulder to cry on, you can always call me.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time at work. And so having experiences that are not terrible and tools that we love using, right? Like it makes a big difference in people's lives.
Huge difference. And it is so fun when it works.
Yeah.
It's the best. And look, if you're selling enterprise technology, don't forget there's no better sales method than an event. Just saying.
Yeah.
Just saying. And I got a heck of a
true.
piece of product for you if you're here thinking in those terms.
Check it out, splashthat.com. That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, or just to learn more about enterprise features, find us at enterpriseready.io. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com to check out the library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders. This podcast is also brought to you by my company, Replicated, where we enable cloud-native software vendors like HashiCorp, CircleCI, Sneak, and many others to operationalize and scale the distribution of their modern on-prem applications to the largest enterprise customers. Check us out at replicated.com.